bring on the discussion. Bring on your comments critiquing my Star Wars views, because now it is the time for me to get lambasted for my opinions for which Star Wars things I like the most and which things I like the least. I'm going to be ranking every single Star Wars television show and film here. Last time I did this was when Obi-Wan Kenobi came out last year, and you guys had some strong opinions on my rankings. Now I'm doing this including Ahsoka. Last time was also a tier list format. This time I'm just going to be ranking them from worst to best. So a couple more stipulations before we start. I'm not including Forces of Destiny or any of the YouTube kind of short content that's been put out over the years in Star Wars canon. I'm also not including anything Lego. Also, I won't be including Tales of the Jedi, because although there is a season of it, kind of is just two small arcs that are a part of one show. Obviously, these are my opinions, and we're mostly focusing on my favorites. So if you disagree with me, that's fine. Your favorites are probably different than mine, and let's try to debate why things are better than others. All right, let's just get started with the worst. I think you all know what it's going to be. The Star Wars Holiday Special. I've come around on at least like watching scenes and just laughing about it. I still can't get over the ridiculous makeup used on Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher. I will always admire Harrison Ford's just absolute apathy for this thing. He does not want to be there, and it is hilarious. Boba Fett's first appearance, even though it's not really a good one, but it has given us Life Day. It is something that is fun to appreciate every year in an ironic sense, but it is the worst Star Wars thing of all time. It is in dead last. Coming in at 27 for me is going to be Caravan of Courage and Ewok Adventure. Caravan of Courage was not something I grew up with. I actually watched it for the first time when Disney Plus put all of that vintage collection content up on their service. The pacing was terrible. It is such a boring movie. And on top of that, the main character, Mace, is absolutely insufferable. He is such an annoying character. The plot was very simple and basic. It doesn't utilize Endor nearly as much as it should, but overall, this movie is something I never really intend to watch again. Subsequently, coming in at number 26 is going to be Ewoks: The Battle for Endor. Battle for Endor steps it up dramatically from Caravan of Courage. Where Caravan of Courage is insufferably boring, Battle for Endor actually has some good action sequences. It tries to build on the lore with some witches and some weird fantasy things. It also has Wilfred Brimley in it, who carries a little bit more weight than having Mace in the last movie. Then on top of that, Mace and his family are just literally killed off right at the beginning, erasing everything from Caravan of Courage that happened. Not a big fan of the Ewoks being able to talk in this one, speak basic. Still though, this is a major step up, and that's why it's ahead of Caravan of Courage for me in my rankings. Coming in at 25 is Star Wars Resistance. Resistance was a 2-season animated show on Disney XD. Initially, it was kind of billed as the follow-up to Rebels with new characters that would flesh out the early sequel timeline. It kind of did that, but for the most part, it was a lot more kid-friendly than Rebels became. Resistance characters were a bit too melodramatic for me. Characters like Kazuto Siono and Tam weren't necessarily too gripping. A couple characters like Jaeger stood out. I did like the cel-shaded art design. That was something that could work if done properly. This show, unfortunately, was just cut short a little bit too early, and unfortunately, I don't really ever think about it anymore. Coming in at 24 for me is Droids. I watched Droids here and there growing up, but it was never a staple of my childhood. Droids is kind of a weird Saturday morning cartoon. It both wants to be very over the top and elastic, like a lot of kids' cartoons are, with some goofy moments and fun visuals, but it also has a lot of human characters who frankly aren't animated very well. There's a contrast between trying to do kind of a more grounded story in Droids, but also wanting to appease kids who just want to see things blow up, or Droid's arms pop off, or see 3PO's head spin around in a circle. Overall, I think that's why it was never as successful as Ewoks, and it's the reason I personally prefer Ewoks more. Ewoks, just like Droids, I grew up with some of the DVDs that had a few episodes. Enjoyed them as a kid, but they were never staples of my childhood. Going back and rewatching Ewoks, though, I did have a bit more of appreciation for what they do with that show. Ewoks genuinely is a fun Saturday morning cartoon. There's not much weight to it. It doesn't grow beyond being a children's show, but as a piece of nostalgia, it does work pretty well. But its stories are simple enough and entertaining enough to where you can go rewatch it as an adult and at least get something out of it. Number 22 for me is Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the 2008 film. I saw this back in 2008 with my dad. It was the first ever midnight movie I ever got to see, and there are a lot of parts of this movie I really like. I'm a big fan of the opening scene in the Battle of Christophsis. I think it does add a bit of that war dynamic that they wanted to give the Clone Wars with 3D animation. It also introduces characters like Captain Rex and Ahsoka, who become mainstays for the entirety of the series. The Battle of Teth is also a really cool sequence and one that I love rewatching. It's very underrated. There are moments where this really struggles though. After the opening Battle of Christophsis, it seems like almost the budget for the rest of the Battle of Christophsis was cut in half. And then the thing that really drops it low for me is the ending. Zero the Hutt is really one of the worst Star Wars characters ever. His introduction and kind of just random revealed to be the main villain who's kind of in charge of the entire plot of this film comes out of absolutely nowhere. There are a lot of cool things that I do like, but unfortunately it is my number 22. Coming in at 21, and it's really sad to say this, is the Book of Boba Fett. Book of Boba Fett was something I was very excited for. It has its moments for sure, but the Boba Fett storyline is the reason I'm dropping it this low. This was a huge disappointment. We got a chance to bring in the badass bounty hunter version of Boba Fett that frankly you only get glimpses of in the original trilogy. This was the moment to let him shine. We got a really cool scene with him in The Mandalorian Season 2. And it fell flat to me. Not only did I not dig the story, but the visuals seemed very off. This was one of the smallest uses of the volume I've seen. Sets just felt extremely tiny. Action scenes were also just not kinetic enough, not using Boba's jetpack or weapons as much as he should. I was very tempted to put this higher because of what I call Mandalorian Season 2.5. Episodes 5 and 6 of the show are genuinely some of my favorite Star Wars episodes ever in any Star Wars live action TV. They're so good, but I don't even think about them with the show because they have nothing to do with the main plot or with Boba Fett. Overall, I am looking forward to more from the Book of Boba Fett, and I really hope we get it. But unfortunately, what we got with Season 1 just wasn't for me. I have to put it at number 21. Coming in at number 20 is one of the hardest things I had to rank on this list. I mentioned at the beginning, this is mostly my favorites, what means the most to me, rather than what I think is the best. Although that does play a little part in it, I can't turn my objective film brain off all the time. And as much as I've enjoyed something like Star Wars Visions, it just doesn't mean as much to me as a lot of other Star Wars projects that are higher on the list. I do feel bad putting Visions at number 20 because it is a really good series. Both seasons I've really enjoyed almost all the episodes. There are only a handful of ones that I thought were mediocre, but I think the short form storytelling, the fact that it is relatively infinities amongst Star Wars canon, makes this something that drops down my priority list when I'm thinking about Star Wars content to watch. Still a very good series. Number 20 is a solid rank for it. At number 19, I'm going to have to drop The Bad Batch. The Bad Batch Season 1 and 2 have been very solid overall. There have been very few episodes that I didn't like of this show. Season 1's opening episode was fantastic to me. It also had a strong arc across the entirety of the season, and I did really enjoy as it started to wrap up and some of the dynamics between its characters. Season 2 to me was a lot slower paced. It had its highs, but it also had a few more middling episodes that felt a bit more filler than plot driven like Season 1's did. The character work in Season 2 definitely redeems it, and the ending is really good, and if the stakes at the ending of Season 2 hold, then I think overall my thoughts on it will raise. Season 3 I do think is primed to make this maybe a top 15 Star Wars project for me soon, but right now I don't think about this one nearly as much as I think about everything above it, so I'm putting it at number 19. So we're getting into the first live-action Star Wars film on my list, and I really went back and forth between which one is my least favorite. There are three that are going to be in a row here that I think really all interchange for me all the time. But at number 18, I ended up going with Solo, A Star Wars Story. Now, I know there are a ton of you out there, and there's a huge fandom for Solo. For me, Solo is a movie that feels very safe. It's something simple. It doesn't really flesh out the lore much, which is something I particularly love about Star Wars films. Alden Ehrenreich's performance as Han Solo is really strong. I did also like Woody Harrelson as Tobias Beckett. The major standout of this film by far is Emilia Clarke as Kira. Plus, Darth Maul's reveal at the end was pretty awesome. There are just things that I don't love about this movie. I'm not a big fan of L3. I like this movie, don't get me wrong, but amongst the Star Wars films, this is the one that I go back to the least. So if I haven't already lost you, now we're jumping to number 17, which will be for me Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. The Rise of Skywalker is a very imperfect film. First 20 minutes are paced at ludicrous speed. It rushes through transitions through characters in the beginning that really should have been given a lot of time to explore and grow and shine so that their transition throughout the entire film is felt a little bit stronger. There's a clear absence of legacy characters, and although all three of them do appear in this film, you don't really feel the weight of it as much. Honestly, the one you feel the weight of the most is Han, and that appearance to me works very well with the transition of Ben Solo from Kylo Ren back to Ben. Leia's death to me is something that feels thematically rich. Unfortunately, not having Carrie Fisher there, it feels weird. It does feel weird. The thing I do always appreciate about The Rise of Skywalker is that it actually did try to go for something. The lore here is some of the best in the sequel trilogy. There are attempts at doing something very cool, which I think in other material we can really flesh out and make somehow Palpatine returned like a plot point that actually is very, very interesting. I still can't stand the way Palpatine dies. I hate just the fact that he shoots Force lightning back at himself again, and this time it kills him instead of just damaging his face. But for moments like Palpatine shooting lightning into the sky with the bass drop, with the music, all of that is very, very cool. I like the idea of Exegol. I like a lot of the ideas of the Sith Eternal and a lot of the stuff around the cults of the Sith. I think that stuff can really play well in the future. Never been a huge fan of Rey being Palpatine. I would acknowledge Solo is better, but for me, I rewatched the saga all the time, so I've seen this movie more than Solo, so that's why it's number 17 for me. And at number 16, the other one that I had to go back and forth with The Rise of Skywalker and Solo, A Star Wars Story, is Attack of the Clones. I grew up with this film though, so I do enjoy watching it a lot more than I enjoy watching The Rise of Skywalker or Solo. There are problems with it for sure. There is some stilted dialogue. The love scenes are not great. Some great plot lines with Obi-Wan though, kind of the detective story with Obi-Wan trying to uncover who is behind the assassination on Padme, who is behind the clone army. All really cool stuff. The Dooku scenes are all really good, although the lightsaber duels in this are definitely the weakest of the entire prequel trilogy. One of the most underrated sequences, in my opinion, in this film, though, is the Battle of Geonosis. The Battle of Geonosis is really cool. I love the way it's shot. I love the dust and the grime around it when you have the super battle droids going off against the clones and all the Jedi. You see the lightsabers through the fog of sand. And of course, the arena battle was everything to me growing up. Before we even had Revenge of the Sith, I would watch that over and over and over again. Attack of the Clones is the Star Wars movie that I watch and go, yeah, that one has a lot of flaws, but I still love it nonetheless. Number 15 for me is The Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace for me is a better film than Attack of the Clones. It might be poorly paced in its middle act, but what we get in the beginning and in the middle, at the end of the middle act with the pod race, and of course the Duel of the Fates and the whole Battle of Theed, really amazing stuff. I do love watching what Lucas does to lay the lore down for early prequel era. It's stuff that I've always eaten up. Even as a kid, I loved this film. Palpatine is very menacing. Of course, you have Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor's first time playing him, and I think it works really well. He is overshadowed by Qui-Gon Jinn and Liam Neeson's powerhouse performance playing the character of Qui-Gon. There are a lot of things I really love about this film. My love of it, my nostalgia of it, and also the things I think it does really well, boosted all the way up to my number 15. My number 14, continuing with the string of Star Wars live-action films, is Star Wars Episode VIII, The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi is a really well directed film. It feels very cohesive in its vision. Its visual design is tight and very well done. Some fantastic cinematography. My biggest problems with it are the Finn and Rose plot. I feel like Finn's arc is very much so repeated a second time from where it is in The Force Awakens. Poe's plot point, I understand the arc. I think the arc is alright, but I would have preferred the arc to progress a bit differently. Things I do love about this film, I do really love Rey and Kylo Ren's Force dyad. I think that works extremely well. A really cool piece of Star Wars mythology, and that now has been added from the sequels. To me, it is by far my favorite piece of Force lore that has been added to the sequels. And I do appreciate Mark Hamill's performance as Luke in this film. The only thing for me is I want a lot more for why we get Luke into this moment. To me, it doesn't just begin and end with the Rashomon style misunderstanding between him and Ben Solo. There has to be a bit more to it. I think it has something to do with Mara Jade. Once we tie all of that together, The Last Jedi could even go up for me, because I genuinely do think it's a really well crafted film. My biggest problems with it are on a story perspective. Coming in at 13 for me is, surprisingly, has dropped a bit, The Mandalorian. I've never been somebody who's absolutely obsessed with The Mandalorian. I think it's a very good show. Season 1 is really good, starts out with 3 great episodes, has 3 in the middle that are fine to actually kind of downright bad, and then it redeems itself. Season 2 I thought was great pretty much all the way through. Absolutely loved the finale, loved the build up to the finale. The episode with Ahsoka the Jedi is one of my favorite live action Star Wars episodes still, but season 3 for me, there weren't very many highs, if any at all. Other than maybe the second to last episode, there weren't too many times where I was fully enthralled by what was going on. Most of the season I was searching for what the overarching plot line was, but the finale felt really rushed. It could have dragged on into season 4, tried to prolong that Mandalorian conflict, the conflict that the show frankly has been building up to since the end of season 1. But season 3 aside, I do love season 2, and I think season 1 is really good. So this cracks the top half of my Star Wars rankings. Season 4 could definitely push it back up towards that top 10, although I never had it in the top 10 to begin with. At number 12 for me is gonna be a controversial one as well, and it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi is a series that is quite messy. I would completely agree with you if you said that. There are certain episodes that are not used well at all. Episode 4 of the series is a massive missed opportunity to explore Obi-Wan's reconnection with the Force. I agree with the idea that the character of Reva is not necessarily as thematically rich in this narrative as they think it is when they're telling the story. The bread and butter, the steak and potatoes of this series was Obi-Wan versus Darth Vader, and I absolutely loved it. Episode 3 I thought was spectacular, seeing Vader massacre those people in horror movie style in the village just to draw Obi-Wan out was absolutely terrifying. And of course the finale, the final fight between Obi-Wan and Vader is so good. Probably the best lightsaber duel in the Disney era. Ewan McGregor of course delivers as well. He's so good as Obi-Wan. Vivian Lyra Blair is fantastic as Leia. She is such a revelation in this show, and I was so happy we got that character. And finally, Hayden Christensen getting a chance to start his redemption tour, which he's continued with Ahsoka. For us fans who have always loved him, we are excited to finally see him get his due. The highs story-wise, the highs character-wise for characters I genuinely love so much, they outweigh everything. It's my number 12. Coming in at 11 is Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. The ending, the last hour of this movie is so good. It's one of the best final acts in any Star Wars movie, television series, anything ever. Battle of Scarif is the top tier space ground battle we've seen in all of Star Wars under Disney. The direction in those sequences is really solid. Characters are built up well. I don't think any of them truly stand out besides K2SO. Cassian was a very good character, a very promising character, and has since delivered, but the characters are a bit of the weaker part of this film. But this is a plot-driven film, and I do really enjoy the plot. There are a lot of cool ideas like Saw Gerrera's group, which are more guerrilla tactics, a lot more violent and scary. And of course, the Vader hallway sequence is the capper of the whole thing. I did appreciate what was done with Tarkin in this film as well. Director Krennic is also a very good villain. Overall, Rogue One is just a really good Star Wars movie. Flaws and all, and especially with the beginning of the first act, after that cold open scene, there are some pacing problems and some weird cuts. But even with those flaws, the story told here is one that is powerful, is emotional, and I really, really enjoyed. Coming in at number 10 for me is Star Wars Clone Wars from 2003, the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars. Star Wars Clone Wars is something I have heavy nostalgia for. This was something I watched endlessly when I was a kid, prepping and getting excited for Revenge of the Sith. I've watched sequences like the Battle of Moonalist with Commander Fordo so many times, Obi-Wan jousting Dirge, Anakin fighting Ventress on Yavin 4, and of course my favorite stuff in the series, General Grievous is so scary. He's terrifying. I love and appreciate the art design. It does not get under the skin of characters nearly as well as the 2008 series, although it does do a good job focusing on Anakin and Obi-Wan. It might not be as thematically rich as some other things that are in my top 10, but I do genuinely love this. It's been a huge piece of nostalgia for me growing up. I'm putting Star Wars Clone Wars at number 10. Number 9 for me is Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens is my favorite of the sequel trilogy. It's a movie that I think is really solid top to bottom with its plot structure, its character work, and its overall narrative. It is a safer film. It is one that pays homage to all three of the original trilogy, but I appreciate all of the stuff we got here. I did love the portrayal of Kylo Ren. I love the opening sequence of The Force Awakens as well. Finn is at his best here. This is the best Finn movie. Harrison Ford kills it as Han Solo. He is so good. I do wish we got to see the big three on screen together. That was a missed opportunity. I loved where we were in 2015 getting excited for this. It felt like the fandom was united, even though as prequel fans we're still kind of pushed down, and this movie does a significant job trying to say, yeah, we're not going to do anything that feels prequel. Even though there was that in 2015, there was just a unity about excitement for new Star Wars. Going to that film opening night, waiting in line since from 6 a.m. to movie starting with my friends. I had 30 classmates who went with me. It was just a huge communal experience. My grandparents saw this film, my parents saw this film, my friends, my cousins, my relatives. Everybody saw this movie, and I really love what it meant back then and what it still means to me today. Number 8 and 7 were difficult because these two shows are a toss-up for me, but I'm going with my gut right now. And number 8 right now for me is Ahsoka. Top to bottom, Ahsoka was a very satisfying experience, not just as season 5 of Rebels, but a good progression for the character of Ahsoka, a good introduction to Ahsoka as well as the Rebels characters for the general audience. But there are great lightsaber duels in this. The one between Ahsoka and Baylan Skoll is fantastic. Obviously the scene with Anakin and Ahsoka in possibly the World Between Worlds with the flashbacks to the Clone Wars, that was such a magical moment. But we had great arcs for a character like Sabine, a satisfying arc that carried over from Rebels. I really enjoyed what we got from Sabine. Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Hera Syndulla was an actress that I wasn't 100% sure about taking on that role at first. I loved what she gave to Hera. I thought her performance as Hera was so good, so strong. And then Iman Esfandi as Ezra is literally perfect. He just comes right off of Rebels. And then major new standouts like Baylan Skoll. Ray Stevenson, rest in peace. Your performance as Baylan Skoll was magnificent. And then of course, Lars Mikkelsen as Grand Admiral Thrawn. I've been waiting my entire life to see that character on screen, and I thought he killed it. I loved it. I loved everything about this show. Sure, there are a couple pacing problems in some episodes. I think particularly episode 2 is a little slow. Episode 3 was way too fast, but overall, I love the experience of watching Ahsoka. But I am incredibly excited for what Dave Filoni is doing with the New Republic era. Ahsoka at number 8. Andor is my number 7. Andor is a series that, to me, is not rewatchable, but that's kind of the point. Tony Gilroy as the showrunner really went for a specific style, really diving into the grit and the grime of what made the rebellion. It was just so good, so tight. As a weekly release show, there were some pacing problems. Some episodes came out and felt very slow, a little unsatisfying, but every time that built to something that was fantastic for the end of an arc. The 6th episode ending the heist part of the arc was very, very good. And then the Prison Break was top tier Star Wars. There's a dramatic heft to Andor that is really unmatched. And there are also so many great performances like Diego Luna's as Cassian, but of course Stellan Skarsgård as Luthen Rael. What a great character, and something that really grounds Star Wars while also elevating the importance of the rebellion and the seediness of the Empire. And then of course you have Genevieve O'Reilly finally getting the chance to show off her acting prowess as Mon Mothma. This is a near flawless season of Star Wars TV. It's not necessarily a fun show, but it's a show that proves that you can take Star Wars in a variety of new directions, telling similar familiar stories but from completely new lenses. Andor is my number 7. Coming in at number 6, and it might just be because I've seen this film 3 times already this year, and that's Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is not a perfect film by any means, but there is so much good in the story of Return of the Jedi that it's one that has stuck with me since the first time I saw it, and it continues to remain compelling every single time I see it. The Battle of Endor in space is fantastic, but the thing that continues to hit me over the head over and over and over again, especially as I've gotten older and I've watched this movie more and more, is the redemption arc for Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker's story. Tracking Luke's entrance all the way at the beginning of film in Jabba's palace to his growth, meeting with Yoda again for one last time, talking with Obi-Wan, getting to see his fights in Endor, and then finally the battle with Vader, the showdown in front of the Emperor, him dropping his lightsaber, giving himself up, having his father save him. It is maybe the most powerful arc in Star Wars. I've grown to truly and genuinely love Luke Skywalker almost as much as any Star Wars character. He's my second favorite character behind Obi-Wan. And for me, that weight, the emotion of Luke Skywalker, the emotion of the culmination of the original saga, Vader's return to Anakin, Luke's redemption of his father, and then now, the power of seeing something like Ahsoka and Anakin's redemption there now carrying over into something like that. This film really just does it for me. I don't know if it'll ever crack my top 5, but it's right there at number 6. Getting to the top 5 now, we have gotten to my 5th pick, which is also risen from last time we ranked it, and that is Star Wars Rebels. I've always loved Star Wars Rebels since I watched it every single week on television as it was coming out on Disney XD. But the excitement and build up to Ahsoka, there was a rejuvenation and excitement about these characters that made me want to rewatch so many episodes, so many of my favorite parts of Rebels. And it made me remember how good the best of Star Wars Rebels is. It continues so much about what I loved with the Clone Wars, giving a lot of characters nice, tight arcs, good endings. Obviously, the fight between Ahsoka and Vader is a seminal Star Wars moment for me, but that's not the last seminal Star Wars moment in Rebels. Kanan Jarrus's death is one of the more powerful deaths I've seen in Star Wars, especially in animation. The entirety of Season 4 is near perfection. And Maul's death as well. The use of Maul is great in this show, but Maul's death, him falling into Obi-Wan's arms, finally at peace, it's such a beautiful moment. Rebels just... it has that thing to me, It's one of those things that when you're talking about Rebels, just like when you're talking about your favorite Star Wars stuff, it just makes you stop and just go, I don't know what the words are I want to use to describe this, but there's something there. There's a passion, there's a love for the material, and it permeates the screen into the viewer. And I've genuinely grown to love this show over the years, especially now that we can watch it binged, or you can just skip some episodes. For me, the biggest faults with the show always were the idea of it being a 22 episode season. Even with that though, Rebels gave us so many wonderful characters, such great story, progression of old stuff, and stuff that is still continuing to this day in great Star Wars TV. Coming in at number 4 is Star Wars The Clone Wars. Star Wars The Clone Wars from 2008 to 2020 is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. I grew up watching the show. I've watched literally every episode of the show the day it's come out since 2008. I've seen it transform from fine Star Wars show to something that feels really special. I was a prequel kid, but I was a little too young in the prequel era to understand that people hated those movies. It was when I got to the age where I was at with the Clone Wars that I really started to feel the pressure of, why do I like something that all these other fans are complaining about and hate? I ignored them for the most part because I was enjoying this show, and I'm glad I did, because I can say I've stuck with Star Wars The Clone Wars for my entire life. I've seen Ahsoka grow up with me. The fact that the show not only lasted 7 seasons, but really just meant that all the emotional beats, the progression of animation styles, the progression of character arcs, all that really stuck with me even more because it was kind of always there, a part of my life. I could endlessly talk about my favorite arcs, whether it's Mortis, Maul fighting on Mandalore against Darth Sidious, the Order 66 stuff, the Wrong Jedi arc, the finale, the Siege of Mandalore. There are so many wonderful arcs, but I just want to close by saying the Clone Wars is something very special. Coming in at number 3 is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. A New Hope is the original. It's the template, and when I watch it every time, I'm just blown away by how this movie, which is relatively small compared to the rest of Star Wars, kick-started the imaginations of so many people, young and old. It's a truly transcendent film, a perfect piece of pop sci-fi, one of the first films to truly blend fantasy and science fiction, creating generations of fans, creating generations of material. Once you reach the Death Star, this film just flies by. It's such an incredibly paced film. Marshall Lucas has a lot to do with that. The editing is flawless. Then on top of that, it has such great characters. The introductions to Luke, Leia, Han, Chewbacca, Obi-Wan, Darth Vader, Grand Moff Tarkin. You could go on and on forever about the great characters that start the Star Wars saga. And then the Battle of Yavin, to me, is still my favorite space battle in Star Wars. It's so good. It's timeless. This is a classic film. I genuinely love A New Hope. I look forward to watching this every single time. It's my 3rd favorite Star Wars project of all time. That leaves the top 2. And when we're ranking Star Wars, this movie is the best Star Wars film of all time. But coming in as my 2nd favorite Star Wars film and TV show is Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. The Empire Strikes Back is the most perfect example of the Star Wars formula. It has rich characters that grow and expand in different ways. The use of Han and Leia in this film is near perfect. Their romance is the best romance that's ever been born out of Star Wars. Luke's struggle in his diverging path away from his friends to become a Jedi. This is also arguably the funniest Star Wars film, and everybody talks about how much darker it is than the original. There's so many hilarious moments in this film. You have the addition of Lando, which of course adds a lot of levity and humor, but he's also a fantastic character. Then on top of that, you have the introduction of Yoda, one of the most incredible Star Wars Jedi characters of all time. Frank Oz's performance is so good too. The asteroid sequence, the Battle of Hoth, the lightsaber duel on Bespin. Every scene is perfect. It's so good. It's the best paced Star Wars film too. Characters really evolve in Star Wars, especially across the first 2. Empire Strikes Back is the pinnacle of that. It's the greatest plot twist of all time as well. One of my favorite lightsaber duels. Empire Strikes Back, you don't need to hear me say it. It's a fantastic film. It's the best Star Wars movie of all time. I love it. It's my number 2. And then, not changing from last video, my number 1, yes, I gave it away with my shirt. It is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. For a long time, it was scary saying this is your favorite Star Wars film. People bashed you for liking anything to do with the prequels, even though the story of Revenge of the Sith is the best Star Wars story, bar none. The tragedy, it's the fall of Darth Vader. It's something that we were all looking forward to, we were all craving and wanting for so many years, and we got it. It's not a perfect film. There are pacing problems with the fall of Anakin. I think if some of the other prequel films were drawn out in different directions, you might have seen the gradual decline of Anakin a bit more. It is a bit quick in this movie, but the lightsaber duels are the best of the best. The Obi-Wan versus Anakin duel is my favorite of all the Star Wars duels, but the package here, you have a lot of great sequences. Yoda versus Palpatine. This movie is endlessly quotable to me. My friends and I quote this movie all the time. I know like every line in this. I've seen the first 6 Star Wars movies probably over 100 times each, but Revenge of the Sith, man, this movie I've seen probably closer to 200. It is just something I always have on. I watch sequences from this all the time. It was always in my DVD player growing up. I'll hear people say things in real life that make me think about lines and moments from Revenge of the Sith. This is just like kind of part of me. Revenge of the Sith is part of me. It'll always be a part of my Star Wars taste. And for that, it is my favorite Star Wars film. So thank you all so much for watching. I'm sure my list greatly differs from yours, but let me know your opinions in the comments below. Obviously, I know I won't stop some of you from bashing me, but please try to be respectful about my list. Let me know why you disagree with me. but give me your list and give me reasons why. Don't just tell me I'm an idiot, so we can have a back and forth in the discussion. I have plenty more Star Wars content coming. If you haven't checked out my other channel, I have a channel called Star Wars Lads. That's where I've done all my reviews for Ahsoka. We have a ton of great Star Wars content over there as well. Make sure you check that out. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time.